Hi, thank you again so much for serving on my committee and for all of your help throughout this journey. I'm really excited to share with you my thesis defense on increasing team identification of women's college sports through parasocial interactions. So my project looked at increasing team identification of women's college sports through parasocial interactions. So what is team identification? Team identification is the extent to which someone feels attached to their favorite team. It acts as an extension of one's social identity and is a motivation to consume sports, as found by James and Trail in 2008. Sports fans have high levels of emotional involvement and often describe themselves as a fan of a team when they're interacting with others. For example, "Hi, I'm Courtney, and I'm an Indiana Pacers fan." So why does this matter? Benefits of strong team identification include increase in game attendance, the retention of diehard fans, increased spending on team merchandise, and from a personal level, positive self-esteem. The feelings of inclusion in a group and a feeling of belonging has also been seen to promote positive self-esteem. So the purpose of my study was to examine the effects of parasocial interactions on sports consumption intentions and sports fandom of women's college sports. Parasocial interactions are one-sided interactions between a media user and a character on screen. As Carlson and Donovan found in 2017, the development of these parasocial interactions also involves taking an interest in the character and developing group identification with a character. So this feeling that you belong to the same group as this individual. Over time, these interactions can result in stronger, long-term parasocial relationships. However, I would like to emphasize that my study looks at parasocial interactions in the development of the exposure as in a parasocial relationship. How does this relate to team identification? Parasocial interactions involve developing group identification with a character on screen. As Poston found in 1998, when wearing the team's colors, attending every game, and knowing the players' names, positions, and stats, the fans begin to feel as if they're an integral part of the team. Parasocial interactions with athletes can actually extend beyond the sport itself and include things such as the purchase of merchandise or watching the games on TV. Now looking at my study, I'm going to introduce you to my research questions and hypotheses. In research question 1, I asked very broadly, what is the nature of parasocial interactions between college students and the student-athlete spokesperson? Research question 2 asked the extent to which parasocial interactions then affect one's consumption intention. Hypothesis 1 predicted that college students report higher levels of intentions to consume sports when they have established a parasocial interaction with an athlete on the team. Research question 3 asked if the perceived inclusion level, whether the viewer feels like they're included as a member of the group or excluded and an outsider from the group, have an effect on the parasocial interactions between the college students and the student-athlete spokesperson. Hypothesis 2 predicted that a perception of inclusion in the group would lead to greater parasocial interactions among college students. Research question 4 asked if spokesperson visibility, whether the spokesperson was on screen or off screen, would affect the parasocial interaction levels. Hypothesis 3 predicted that on-screen delivery would lead to higher parasocial interaction levels. Lastly, research question 5 examined if self-reported level of fandom positively correlated with sports consumption intentions. An overview of my methods: I used a pre-test, post-test experimental design, and it was a 2x2. My independent variables were inclusion level, inclusive or exclusive, and the spokesperson visibility, on-screen or off-screen. My dependent variables were the parasocial interaction level and the sports consumption intentions. The scales that I used specifically were Wan and Bronscomb's Sports Spectatorship Identification Scale. This was used in my pre-test as a way to measure sports fandom and had an alpha value of 0.91. It consisted of 7 9-point Likert scale questions with responses ranging from not at all to very much. Questions included, how strongly do you see yourself as a fan of this team? I then looked at Borcarnia and Brown's Celebrity Persona Parasocial Interactions Scale, which had an alpha of 0.8 to 0.9. The full scale consisted of 20 5-point Likert scale questions ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and questions such as persona makes me feel as if I am with someone I know well. However, for my study, I pared that scale down to 14 Likert scale questions, but I kept the proportion of the subcategories of questions the same. Lastly, I used Kim, Trail, and Co.'s Sports Consumption Behavior Scale, which has an alpha of 0.83 to 0.95. This has 9 7-point Likert scales ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and questions such as I intend to attend the team's games. So my sample consisted of 177 undergraduate participants. However, I only included the 138 completed surveys in my analysis. There were 44% male and 55% female, and all 4 grades were represented. This was a very upper class heavy pool. However, there were around 10% freshmen and 10% sophomores, and then 43.5% juniors and 36% seniors. I also looked at how many Division I athletes were in my participant pool and found that nearly 27% of my participants were Division I athletes at the university. The teams represented included women's cross country and track and field, men's cross country and track and field, women's lacrosse, men's lacrosse, women's soccer, women's basketball, men's basketball, volleyball, and baseball. I then looked at the self-assessed sports fandom level, which I will also discuss later on, but over half of the participants categorized themselves as avid sports fans, around 43% moderate sports fans, and only around 3.5% were non-sports fans. So how the study worked. Surveys were distributed via a QR code that could be held up to an iPhone or a URL, which both took the participants to Qualtrics to the survey. Participants were then randomly assigned to one of 4 conditions that were a combination of inclusion level and spokesperson visibility, and those are seen on the screen, each of the conditions. First, participants were asked a set of pre-test questions. Then they viewed the first of 2 videos. Following video 1, they answered the post-test questions regarding that video. Then they were directed to video 2, and then answered the post-test questions for video 2. Now moving on to the media production piece, specifically the videos, again highlighting my independent variables, inclusion level, and spokesperson visibility. The inclusive videos included we and us in the verbiage used by the spokesperson, whereas the exclusive videos separated the viewer from the team using words like the team or the Panthers, giving more of an outsider's perspective. For spokesperson visibility, the on-screen delivery showed the spokesperson on the screen making eye contact at the viewer. There was a small amount of B-roll footage added to the on-screen videos to cover up some jump cuts made during the editing process, but the off-screen delivery consisted solely of B-roll footage from the athlete and the team, and it was more of a voiceover narration of the same script. As I mentioned, there were 2 videos watched per condition, which means that there were 8 videos in total. Thesis videos 1 and 5 were paired, 2 and 6, 3 and 7, and 4 and 8. So each participant would watch the same condition, but for 2 sports, and those sports were also viewed in random order. So some people saw the track video first, others saw lacrosse first. And finally, my results. Research question 1 looked at the nature of parasocial interactions between college students and the spokesperson. So I first looked at the Division I athlete status responses to the parasocial interaction levels. An independent samples t-test was conducted, and as seen in the table, Division I athletes recorded higher parasocial interaction levels than non-Division I student athletes for both the track and field parasocial interaction scale and the combined parasocial interaction scale. I then looked at the effect of grade in school split into underclassmen and upperclassmen on the parasocial interaction levels. Underclassmen consisted of the freshmen and sophomores, and upperclassmen were juniors and seniors. I conducted an independent samples t-test and found that underclassmen reported higher parasocial interaction levels than upperclassmen for both the track and field parasocial interaction scale and the combined parasocial interaction scale. Now, the significance for the combined parasocial interaction score from the past two tables was largely driven by the track and field parasocial interaction levels. So, I looked at the frequency of each athletic team represented in the survey, and as shown, there were a lot more track and field athlete respondents than lacrosse respondents. Underclassmen overall developed stronger parasocial interaction levels than their upper class peers. Some reasons for this may be that they were more influenced by the videos, as they were newer college students and newer to the university. So they may have been very excited about the athletics. Also, they may have come from a strong high school athletics atmosphere. On the other hand, maybe upperclassmen were just more invested in other social activities or had found their niche elsewhere, perhaps in a sorority or fraternity or some other leadership position on campus, and so they weren't as interested in sports. For Division I athletes, they reported higher parasocial interaction levels than non-Division I athletes. And this could be because athletes likely already know the spokesperson outside of the video and had an impression of the athlete and the sport already. Chances are, since it is a mid-size, smaller university, a lot of the athletes know each other and interact with each other, so this may have affected their responses. Research question 2 asked the extent to which parasocial interactions affect consumption intentions. So I first conducted a correlation to determine the association between parasocial interactions and sports consumption intentions, and found a moderately strong correlation between the two variables at 0.744. I then used a high-low split to divide the parasocial interaction levels into high and low and conducted an independent samples t-test. As seen in the table in the p-values, hypothesis 1 was supported. The stronger the parasocial interactions with the athlete, the higher the sports consumption intentions. I then conducted a follow-up from research question 1, looking at the effect of grade in school, upperclassmen and underclassmen, on their sports consumption levels, since I found significant findings with the parasocial interaction levels. I conducted another independent samples t-test and found that underclassmen had significantly higher sports consumption intentions than upperclassmen. Sports consumption intentions are positively influenced by parasocial interaction levels. The more people relate to an athlete, the more likely they are to intend to consume that athlete's sport. Strong parasocial interaction levels can encourage sports consumption, which is beneficial to an athletic department as well as specific teams. I like to think about the idea of having a favorite athlete. Chances are you've watched a game, maybe even attended a game in person, or bought a jersey or a shirt or some other form of merchandise. Research question 3 and hypothesis 2 looked at the effect of inclusion level on parasocial interaction levels. I conducted an independent samples t-test and as seen, hypothesis 2 was not supported. There was no significant effect of inclusion level on parasocial interaction levels. Inclusive or exclusive verbiage does not have an effect on parasocial interaction levels. Participants likely relied on their own preconceived impressions of the athletes or the teams than on the message of the video itself. Research question 4 and hypothesis 3 looked at the effect of spokesperson visibility on parasocial interaction levels, and another independent samples t-test was conducted. Hypothesis 3 was also not supported, and there were no significant effects of spokesperson visibility on parasocial interaction levels. Whether the spokesperson was on screen or off screen did not have an effect on the parasocial interaction levels. The style of video could have been affected by participant preferences as well as how much attention was paid to the video. I know from my personal experiences during the data collection, I noticed that if some participants didn't have headphones, they would either hold the phone up to their ear or listen with very low volume. Also, when testing my materials with my graduate student peers, some of them enjoyed the on-screen video and the eye contact and putting a face to a name, but a lot of them preferred the off-screen video that was more exciting and more of a highlight reel. Also, preconceived impressions of the athletes in the sport could have affected their responses. Lastly, research question 5 looked at the effect of sports fandom on sports consumption intentions. I conducted a one-way ANOVA using the self-assessed sports fandom level that was a multiple choice question. However, while I did find significant findings, I did run into the ceiling effect, and as you can see in the table, hardly any participants identified themselves as non-sports fans. There were 74 that were avid sports fans, 59 moderate, and only 5 that said they were not at all a sports fan. I created new variables using the pretest sports spectatorship identification scale questions and reran a one-way ANOVA. As you can see in the table, there was a much more even split and an even distribution between the 3 groups, and again, I found significant findings. So there was a significant difference between sports fandom on sports consumption intentions. Avid sports fans were more likely than moderate sports fans and non-sports fans to intend to consume sports. The people who answered that they were non-sports fans in the pretest were also likely the ones with lower consumption intentions following the videos, which suggests that the videos themselves may have not been enough to change an opinion about the sport. Now moving on to the limitations from my study. First, I only sampled from one university, and this was important that the spokesperson and participants attended the same college, but this does affect the generalizability of my results. Next, I only used 2 sports, women's track and field and women's lacrosse. These were chosen for specific reasons, a few being that they both compete in the same facility, and they also both compete during the spring semester, which is when this survey was being distributed. This was done to relieve any confounding variables. However, this was only 2 of the women's sports offered at this college campus. Could the responses differ across different sports? We even found that in research question 1, in some cases, the track and field parasocial interaction levels were significant, but for the women's lacrosse, they were not. So the responses could differ depending on the sport that's studied. Next, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the data collection was stopped early and the projected sample size was not obtained. This means that a lot of my results should be taken with caution because of this limited sample size. I had a few findings that were not quite significant, but fairly close, and had a projected sample size been met, I may have found some more significant findings in this study. Lastly, there were some issues with the sports fandom question. This was one multiple choice question in the pre-test and asked participants to identify themselves as either 1, an avid sports fan, 2, a moderate sports fan, or 3, not at all a sports fan. Now, these 3 answer choices could have been interpreted very differently by different people. For example, I would categorize myself as an avid sports fan. However, I couldn't really care less about sports like golf or tennis, or I don't have an appreciation for lacrosse or soccer. So, would that make me more of a moderate sports fan? There may have been some misinterpretation or some vagueness surrounding these 3 answer choices. Looking in hindsight, it may have been useful to ask this on more of a scale than just 3 multiple choice responses, because we did run into that ceiling effect. Some ideas for future research would include expanding the sports. So as I mentioned, I only included 2 sports in this study based on the scope of the project, but it would be interesting to compare across multiple sports, perhaps looking at multiple team sports or multiple individual sports. And it would also be useful to expand across different universities with different teams and athletic cultures. Another approach would be to take a more longitudinal approach to this study, because in this project, participants were only exposed to 1 short video per athlete, around 1 minute, which was completed in 1 sitting of around 10 minutes. It would be useful to expand the study to perhaps follow a student athlete in a series of videos or repeated exposures to try to encourage the development of those parasocial interactions and feelings of friendship. Lastly, the present study only focused on women's college sports. So, how would the parasocial interactions and sports consumption intentions differ between men's and women's sports? Or would you find similar findings when you looked only at men's sports? Overall, the athletic departments should look to encourage parasocial interactions, as this increases sports consumption intentions. This could include things such as game attendance, the purchase of merchandise, strong fandom, and the retention of fans. Parasocial interactions may not be developed after only 1 exposure. It may take repeated exposures for those feelings of friendship to begin to develop. While parasocial interactions don't extend beyond the media as parasocial relationships do, they may not only be developed after 1 minute. It might take a little bit longer or repeated exposures for those feelings. Overall, I found that the relationship with the athlete matters more than the details of the message delivery. The nitty-gritty details, whether or not the athlete was on the screen or B-roll footage was used, or whether there was a feeling of inclusion in the group with the scripts that were used by the spokesperson. Those didn't seem to have an effect as much as the levels of parasocial interaction in increasing sports consumption intentions. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to answering all of your questions in the Q&A.